The notification ping on Dr. Isabelle Cruz's phone echoed through the sterile corridors of Mount Elizabeth Hospital at 3:47 a.m. What she saw on the lab results screen would change everything. But that was still 18 months away. Tonight, she was just another dedicated nurse working the graveyard shift in Singapore's most prestigious private medical facility, unaware that her life was about to collide with a man whose charm would prove more deadly than any virus in their infectious disease ward. 3 floors above, Dr. Marcus Tan was reviewing patient charts in his corner office overlooking Orchard Road's glittering skyline. At 42, he was everything Singapore's medical establishment celebrated. Brilliant, published, and utterly ruthless in his pursuit of excellence. The framed certificates on his mahogany walls told the story of a man who had never failed at anything that mattered. Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins Fellowship, Singapore Medical Council's Young Physician Award, a research portfolio that made pharmaceutical companies compete for his consultation fees. But Marcus Tan was about to fail at something that would destroy not just his career, but the lives of everyone who trusted him. If you're drawn to stories where medicine meets obsession, where healing hands become instruments of destruction, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Because what you're about to witness isn't just another medical drama. This is a deep dive into how the very people we trust to save lives can become the ones who take them. And in Singapore's pristine medical world, where reputation is everything and secrets run deeper than the Marina Bay, one affair will expose the deadly intersection of passion, power, and revenge. Marcus had perfected the art of compartmentalization long before he met Isabelle Cruz. His morning routine was choreographed with surgical precision. 5:30 a.m. workout in his private Sentosa Cove gym, where floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a view worth 8 million Singapore dollars. The BMW X7 purring in his driveway represented the same meticulous attention to status that governed every aspect of his life. Even his coffee was curated, Ethiopian single-origin beans ground fresh each morning by his Filipino helper, Maria, who had been with the family for 8 years and understood that Dr. Tan's schedule was sacred. The breakfast table at the Tan household looked like something from Singapore Tatler's lifestyle section. Jennifer, his wife of 15 years, scrolled through her corporate emails while their 2 children, Emma, 14, and Jonathan, 12, discussed their upcoming international baccalaureate assessments. Jennifer Tan was herself a formidable presence, a senior partner at Drew and Napier specializing in international arbitration. Her Hermes handbag contained contracts worth millions, and her schedule was as demanding as her husband's. They functioned like a well-oiled corporation, each member playing their role in maintaining the family's position in Singapore's elite circles. The Wongs are hosting their charity gala next month, Jennifer mentioned without looking up from her iPad. It's for the Children's Cancer Foundation. They're expecting us to contribute significantly. Marcus nodded, signing a school permission slip for Emma's overseas academic trip. How much? 50,000 should be appropriate for our tier. Emma looked up from her organic steel-cut oats. Dad, can you attend my debate competition next Friday? I'm arguing the affirmative on genetic engineering ethics. The pride in Marcus's eyes was genuine. His daughter had inherited his intellectual rigor and his wife's argumentative skills. Of course. What's your position? That CRISPR technology could eliminate hereditary diseases, but we need strict regulatory frameworks to prevent enhancement discrimination. These moments of family connection were Marcus's anchor to normalcy. Here, surrounded by the symbols of his success, he could almost forget the growing emptiness that had been consuming him for the past 3 years. Jennifer was brilliant, successful, and completely absorbed in her own career trajectory. Their conversations had evolved into logistics meetings. Their intimacy had become scheduled, perfunctory, another box to check in their perfectly managed lives. But beneath the surface of this carefully curated existence, Marcus harbored a secret that would have shocked anyone who knew him. He had grown up as the son of a traditional Peranakan family, where excellence wasn't just expected, it was demanded. His father, a prominent surgeon, had died when Marcus was 12, leaving behind impossible standards and a mother whose love came conditional on achievement. Every success had been met with expectations for greater success. Every accomplishment had been followed by the question, what's next? The drive to Mount Elizabeth Hospital took Marcus through Singapore's morning symphony of efficiency. Marina Bay's iconic skyline reflected his own aspirations, towering glass monuments to relentless achievement. The hospital itself was a testament to medical excellence, where patients flew in from across Southeast Asia seeking treatment that combined cutting-edge technology with five-star hospitality. Marcus's parking space was reserved, his name etched in brass beside Dr. Marcus Tan, Chief of Infectious Diseases. His department occupied the entire 7th floor, a realm where life and death decisions were made with the clinical precision that had built Singapore's reputation as a medical hub. The infectious disease ward handled cases that would challenge doctors anywhere in the world. HIV, AIDS patients from across the region sought treatment here. Hepatitis outbreaks required immediate containment. Rare tropical diseases demanded expertise that existed in only a handful of minds worldwide. Marcus thrived in this environment. The complexity energized him. The stakes validated his sense of importance. The respect from colleagues and patients fed an ego that had grown accustomed to being fed. During morning rounds, junior doctors hung on his every word. Nurses prepared meticulously for his questions. Patients' families looked at him like he was their personal savior. Dr. Tan, his chief resident, Dr. Amanda Lim, approached with morning reports. The HIV patient in room 712 is responding well to the new combination therapy. Viral load is down 90% from admission. Excellent. Any signs of resistance? None so far. The patient specifically asked to thank you for explaining the treatment protocol. He said you made him feel hopeful for the first time since diagnosis. These interactions fed something deep in Marcus's psyche. Here, he wasn't just another successful professional maintaining Singapore's economic engine. He was a healer, a scientist, someone whose decisions literally meant the difference between life and death. The power was intoxicating, the respect genuine, the impact measurable. But lately, even these professional highs felt hollow. He had achieved everything he had dreamed of achieving, and the question that haunted his quiet moments was, what's next? He had published in every major journal. He consulted for pharmaceutical giants. His research had influenced treatment protocols worldwide. His bank account reflected his success. His social calendar confirmed his status. His professional reputation was unassailable. So why did he feel so empty? The answer would come in the form of a 29-year-old nurse from Cebu whose compassion would prove to be both her greatest strength and her fatal vulnerability. Isabelle Cruz had arrived in Singapore 3 years earlier with 2 suitcases, a nursing degree from Universidad de San Carlos, and a determination forged by being the eldest of 5 siblings in a family where education was a luxury few could afford. Her father, Ramon, drove a jeepney through Cebu's chaotic streets, earning just enough to keep rice on the table. Her mother, Elena, took in laundry from wealthier neighbors, her hands permanently stained by other people's lives, her back bent from years of labor that started before dawn and ended after dark. Isabelle's nursing program had been funded by remittances from an aunt working in Dubai, payments that came with the unspoken understanding that success wasn't optional. The pressure to excel, to escape, to lift her family from poverty had shaped every decision she had made since childhood. When the opportunity arose to work in Singapore, she didn't hesitate, despite knowing it meant leaving behind everything familiar. Her HDB flat in Ong Mo Kio was a world away from the luxury of her patients' lives. She shared the 3-room apartment with 3 other Filipino nurses, Grace, who worked in pediatrics, Maria, who specialized in geriatrics, and Carmen, who had been in Singapore for 7 years and served as their unofficial mentor in navigating both the healthcare system and the complex social dynamics of being foreign workers in one of the world's most expensive cities. Each of them was sending money home. Each of them carried the weight of family expectations that stretched across thousands of miles. Each of them understood the delicate balance between gratitude for opportunities and homesickness for everything they had left behind. The apartment was clean but cramped, filled with the smell of cooking rice and the sound of video calls home during precious off hours. Every month, Isabelle sent $800 to her parents, money that paid for her youngest sister's university tuition, her brother's medical school prerequisites, and the small improvements that gradually lifted their standard of living. The wire transfer receipts were filed carefully in a shoebox under her bed, tangible proof of progress toward dreams that sometimes felt impossibly distant. At Mount Elizabeth Hospital, Isabelle had quickly established herself as someone special. Patients requested her specifically. Families thanked her personally. Colleagues relied on her during crisis situations. She possessed the rare combination of clinical competence and emotional intelligence that made people feel safe in her presence. Her English was excellent, flavored with the gentle accent that reminded patients of the Filipina nurses they had encountered throughout Southeast Asia's medical facilities. The infectious disease ward was particularly demanding. Patients arrived frightened, often facing diagnoses that carried social stigma along with medical consequences. HIV-positive patients, especially, required not just clinical care but emotional support as they navigated treatment protocols and family dynamics that could range from supportive to completely rejecting. Isabelle excelled in this environment because she understood what it meant to carry burdens that couldn't be shared, to smile through pain, to maintain hope when circumstances seemed hopeless. When a young businessman broke down after testing positive for HIV, convinced his life was over, Isabelle didn't just offer medical facts. She sat with him through the night, holding his hand while he grieved the future he thought he was losing, helping him understand that diagnosis wasn't destiny. "My cousin back home has been HIV positive for 8 years," she told him quietly. "He's married now, has 2 beautiful children, runs a successful business. The medicine today, it's like managing diabetes. It's not easy, but it's manageable." Her supervisor, nurse manager Patricia Wong, had noticed Isabelle's exceptional patient rapport within weeks of her arrival. "She has something special," Patricia noted in Isabelle's performance review. "Patients calm down when she enters the room. Families trust her completely, and her clinical knowledge is impressive for someone with her experience level." What Patricia didn't know was that Isabelle's knowledge came from hours of additional study, research papers downloaded and read during her commute, medical journals borrowed from the hospital library. She was driven not just by professional ambition but by a genuine desire to understand the science behind the suffering she witnessed daily. That dedication would soon catch the attention of someone whose notice would change her life forever. It was during one of these difficult cases, on a humid Thursday evening in October, that Dr. Marcus Tan first truly noticed Isabelle Cruz. And in that moment of professional recognition, the countdown to catastrophe began. The patient was a 24-year-old expatriate teacher named David Chun who had tested positive for HIV after a routine health screening required for his work visa renewal. The young man was inconsolable, convinced that his life was over, that his family would disown him, that he would die alone and in shame. 3 different doctors had tried to calm him, explaining treatment protocols and prognosis statistics with the clinical detachment that medical training demanded, but he remained hysterical, his sobs echoing through the infectious disease ward's usually subdued corridors. Marcus was reviewing the case notes in his office when he heard something that made him pause. Gentle singing in Tagalog, accompanied by the kind of quiet conversation that suggested someone was actually listening rather than just talking. The melody was unfamiliar but soothing, threading through the antiseptic atmosphere like incense in a cathedral. Curious, he made his way to room 712, where he found Isabelle sitting beside David's bed, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, explaining HIV treatment in terms that acknowledged both the medical realities and the emotional devastation. "The medicine has come so far," she was saying, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from genuine knowledge rather than memorized protocols. "With proper treatment, people with HIV live normal lifespans. They have families, careers, full lives. This isn't the end of your story, David. It's just a different chapter, and you get to decide how that chapter unfolds." What struck Marcus wasn't just her compassion, though that was evident in every gesture. It was her clinical knowledge. She was discussing viral load counts, medication interactions, and resistance patterns at a level that impressed him. When she explained how modern antiretroviral therapy worked, she used analogies that made complex immunology accessible without being condescending. When she addressed David's fears about transmission and relationships, She combined medical facts with genuine empathy in ways that Marcus rarely witnessed from nursing staff. "Dr. Tan is our chief of infectious diseases," she told David when she noticed Marcus standing in the doorway. "He's one of the leading HIV researchers in Southeast Asia. You're in the best possible hands." Marcus found himself engaging with the patient differently because of Isabelle's presence. Her questions were insightful, revealing understanding that went beyond basic nursing protocols. Her observations about patient psychology were accurate and nuanced. Her suggestions for treatment approaches demonstrated comprehension of not just the medical aspects but the social and emotional complexities that could affect treatment compliance. "Have you considered the psychological impact of the medication schedule on younger patients?" she asked Marcus during their discussion. "In my experience, patients David's age struggle more with the routine than the actual side effects. They feel like the medication schedule makes their condition visible to roommates and friends." It was an astute observation that Marcus hadn't fully considered. Most of his focus remained on viral suppression and drug resistance. The social implications of treatment regimens were typically left to social workers and counselors. But Isabelle was identifying a real barrier to treatment compliance that could affect long-term outcomes. After they left David's room, Marcus lingered in the corridor. The shift change was still 2 hours away, but most of the day staff had already departed, leaving the ward in the quieter rhythm of evening care. "You handled that beautifully," he said, genuinely impressed. "Where did you develop such comprehensive HIV knowledge?" "I've always been interested in infectious diseases," Isabelle replied, her professional demeanor remaining intact despite the compliment from such a senior physician. "I actually read your recent paper on drug-resistant HIV strains in Southeast Asian populations. The implications for treatment protocols were fascinating, especially the resistance patterns you identified in patients with incomplete treatment histories." Marcus was genuinely surprised. His research was highly specialized, published in journals that most nursing staff wouldn't encounter in their routine professional development. The fact that she had not only read it but understood its clinical implications suggested an intellectual curiosity that went far beyond job requirements. "What did you think about the correlation between socioeconomic factors and resistance development?" he asked, testing the depth of her understanding. The conversation that followed lasted 25 minutes and covered territory that Marcus typically only explored with fellow physicians and research collaborators. Isabelle asked questions that revealed not just curiosity but genuine understanding of complex medical concepts. She shared observations from her patient interactions that provided insights Marcus hadn't considered, particularly regarding how cultural factors influence treatment adherence among Southeast Asian immigrant populations. "In my experience," she said, "patients from traditional families often struggle with disclosure issues that affect their support systems. They might have excellent medical care here, but if they can't explain their medication schedules to family members without risking social isolation, compliance becomes much more difficult." It was the kind of observation that could influence policy decisions, the type of insight that came from combining clinical knowledge with real-world cultural understanding. By the time they parted ways, Marcus was looking at Isabelle Cruz very differently than he had that morning. Over the following weeks, Marcus found excuses to consult with Isabelle on difficult cases. He began requesting her for his most challenging patients, justifying the assignment by pointing to her exceptional rapport with HIV-positive clients and her demonstrated understanding of complex treatment protocols. Their professional interactions gradually extended beyond immediate medical needs. They discussed research papers over coffee in the hospital cafeteria. They debated treatment approaches during quiet moments between patient rounds. "Have you ever considered pursuing additional certification in infectious disease nursing?" Marcus asked during one of their coffee conversations in November. "Your clinical insight is remarkable. You could easily qualify for specialized programs." Isabelle was flattered by the attention from such a distinguished physician. Marcus was 15 years her senior, internationally respected, the kind of doctor whose opinion could open doors throughout the medical world. When he asked for her thoughts on complex cases, when he shared insights from his research, when he treated her as an intellectual equal rather than just another nurse following orders, she felt valued in ways she had rarely experienced. "I've thought about it," she admitted. But the programs are expensive and I have family obligations back home. Maybe someday, when my siblings finish school. The hospital has continuing education grants, Marcus suggested. I could recommend you for consideration. Your work deserves recognition. These conversations revealed more than professional respect. Marcus learned about Isabelle's family responsibilities, her financial pressures, her dreams of advancement that seemed perpetually deferred by circumstances beyond her control. She learned about his research passions, his frustrations with hospital politics, his genuine dedication to advancing HIV care in the region. The transition from professional collaboration to personal intimacy began during a particularly difficult night shift in late November. They were treating Maria Santos, a young mother who had unknowingly transmitted HIV to her newborn during childbirth. The baby's prognosis was uncertain, and Maria's guilt was overwhelming every medical intervention they attempted. She blamed herself not just for her child's infection, but for her own positive status, which she had discovered only during prenatal testing. I should have known, Maria kept repeating through tears. I should have protected my baby. What kind of mother doesn't protect her baby? For 6 hours, Marcus and Isabelle worked together to stabilize the infant while providing emotional support to a mother whose grief threatened to interfere with the medical care both she and her baby required. The case required not just clinical expertise but psychological finesse, cultural sensitivity, and the kind of emotional endurance that few healthcare providers could sustain indefinitely. After the baby was finally stable and Maria had been sedated for desperately needed rest, Marcus and Isabelle found themselves alone in his office at 3 a.m., exhausted and emotionally drained. The usual professional boundaries felt less relevant after sharing such an intense experience. Sometimes I wonder if we're actually helping people or just prolonging their suffering, Marcus said, his usual confidence replaced by rare vulnerability. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications about the nature of their work and the limits of medical intervention. You helped Maria understand that love doesn't stop because of a diagnosis, Isabelle replied thoughtfully. You gave her hope that her baby can still have a beautiful life. That's not prolonging suffering. That's creating possibility where she saw only despair. Do you really believe that? That hope is always justified. Isabelle considered the question seriously, recognizing that Marcus was asking something deeper than professional philosophy. I think hope is all we have sometimes. In my family, when my father had his accident and couldn't work for 6 months, hope was what kept us from giving up. Hope that things would get better, that sacrifices would lead to something meaningful. Marcus found himself sharing details about his own life that he rarely discussed with colleagues. The pressure of maintaining his reputation in Singapore's small medical community. The weight of life and death decisions that followed him home every night. The isolation that came with being seen as infallible when he often felt like he was improvising solutions to problems that had no clear answers. Jennifer doesn't understand the emotional toll, he admitted, the words emerging before he fully considered their implications. She sees the prestige, the income, the social status. But she doesn't see what it costs to be responsible for so many lives, to make decisions where being wrong means someone doesn't go home to their family. Isabelle listened without judgment, offering insights that revealed her own depth and emotional intelligence. She understood family pressure, professional expectations, the burden of being someone others depended on for their survival and well-being. Their conversation lasted until dawn, creating an intimacy that transcended their professional relationship and planted seeds that would grow into something much more dangerous. The first time they kissed was 3 weeks later, in an empty consultation room after losing a patient to complications from AIDS-related pneumonia. They had fought for hours to save Chun Wei-Ming, a 35-year-old father of 3 who had responded well to treatment until a sudden respiratory crisis overwhelmed his compromised immune system. The family's grief was devastating, their gratitude mixed with desperate hope that somehow the doctors could still perform a miracle. Wei Ming's wife had collapsed against the wall when Marcus delivered the news, her sobs echoing through corridors where death was supposed to be managed with quiet dignity. Their children, aged 8, 10, and 12, stood in bewildered silence, too young to fully understand that their father was gone, but old enough to recognize that their world had just shattered. In the aftermath, as they cleaned up the medical equipment, and completed the necessary documentation, Marcus and Isabelle found themselves standing close together, sharing the weight of failure that every healthcare provider knows intimately. When Marcus reached out to comfort her, when his hand touched her shoulder and she looked up at him with tears reflecting their shared grief, the kiss happened with an inevitability that neither of them questioned in that moment. "We shouldn't," Isabelle whispered, even as she didn't pull away from his touch. "I know," Marcus replied, his forehead resting against hers. "But I can't stop thinking about you." The admission hung between them like a diagnosis that would change everything. In that sterile room where they had just witnessed the limits of their professional power, they found something that felt infinite and dangerous and completely beyond their control. The affair was about to begin in earnest, and with it, the countdown to catastrophe that would destroy not just their own lives but the lives of everyone who trusted them. The affair escalated quickly after that first kiss in the consultation room. Marcus rented a serviced apartment in River Valley under the name Michael Lim, paying cash for a year-long lease that provided them with privacy away from the hospital's watchful eyes and Singapore's interconnected social circles. The apartment was on the 28th floor of a luxury complex, modern and anonymous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Singapore River's gentle curve through the heart of the city. It was furnished with the kind of sterile elegance found in upscale hotels: neutral colors, expensive materials, and absolutely no personal touches that might suggest permanence. Their Wednesday evening meetings became sacred time, carefully choreographed around Marcus's family obligations and Isabelle's work schedule. Marcus would tell Jennifer he was attending medical conferences or consulting on complex cases that required extended evening hours. The lies came easily, supported by his reputation for dedication and the demanding nature of his specialization. Jennifer, absorbed in her own career pressures and the logistics of managing their household, rarely questioned his absences. Isabelle would arrange her schedule to ensure she was available, often trading shifts with colleagues who assumed she was simply trying to pick up extra hours for the overtime pay. Her roommates in the Ong Mo Kio flat grew accustomed to her Wednesday evening disappearances, attributing them to the demanding social expectations of working with Singapore's medical elite. In that apartment, they created a bubble separate from their real lives, where Marcus could be vulnerable and Isabelle could feel cherished in ways that transcended anything she had experienced before. Marcus was an attentive lover, someone who understood that seduction involved emotional as well as physical intimacy. He brought expensive wine from his personal collection, introduced her to restaurants she could never afford, and listened to her stories about growing up in the Philippines with the kind of genuine interest that made her feel sophisticated and valued. "Tell me about your family," he would say, settling beside her on the apartment's pristine white sofa, still warm from their lovemaking. "What was it like growing up in Cebu?" Isabelle would describe the controlled chaos of her childhood. 7 people sharing a 3-room house, the sound of jeepneys rattling past their window at all hours, the smell of her mother's cooking mixing with exhaust fumes from the busy street. She painted pictures of a world Marcus had never experienced. The weight of being the eldest child in a family where every opportunity came with sacrifice. The pressure of representing not just her own dreams, but the dreams of everyone who had invested in her success. "I remember when I got accepted to nursing school," she told him one evening, her head resting on his chest as rain drummed against the apartment's windows. "My mother cried for 3 hours, not because she was sad, but because she finally believed that one of us might escape." Marcus was genuinely fascinated by these glimpses into a life so different from his own privileged trajectory. He shared stories about his Peranakan heritage, the cultural expectations that had shaped his career choices, the burden of carrying a family name that came with both opportunities and obligations. Their conversations revealed depths that surprised both of them, intellectual compatibility that went beyond physical attraction, emotional understanding that made their professional collaboration even more intimate. For 6 months, their relationship felt sustainable, even inevitable. Marcus convinced himself that he was managing the situation with the same precision he brought to complex medical cases. His family life remained stable, his professional reputation unaffected, his marriage functioning as the social and financial partnership it had become. Isabelle convinced herself that what they shared was real love, that Marcus's marriage was truly just a formality maintained for social convenience, that eventually he would find a way to be with her publicly. Both of them were about to discover how catastrophically wrong they were. The first crack in their carefully constructed reality came on a humid Tuesday morning in April when Jennifer announced she was pregnant with their third child. She delivered the news over breakfast with the same matter-of-fact tone she used for discussing legal cases or household logistics, but Marcus could see the carefully suppressed hope in her eyes. "I know we weren't planning this," Jennifer said, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. "Emma and Jonathan are older now, practically independent. But maybe this is exactly what our family needs." Marcus felt his carefully compartmentalized world begin to shift beneath him like tectonic plates grinding against each other. Emma looked up from her phone with genuine excitement, already planning how she would help with a baby sibling. Jonathan grinned and asked if they could name the baby after his favorite football player. Their enthusiasm was infectious, filling the breakfast room with a warmth that Marcus hadn't felt in years. "How far along?" he managed to ask, his medical training providing automatic questions while his mind raced through implications. 8 weeks. Dr. Liu confirmed it yesterday. Jennifer's smile carried vulnerabilities she rarely allowed herself to show. "I wanted to be sure before I told you. I know your schedule is so demanding, and with the hospital expansion project." The irony was devastating. For months, Marcus had justified his affair by telling himself that his marriage was loveless, that Jennifer was too absorbed in her career to notice his emotional absence, that they were merely cohabiting for the sake of convenience and social expectations. But now, seeing her genuine excitement about expanding their family, he was forced to confront the possibility that his wife still loved him, still believed their marriage could be revitalized. "This is wonderful news," he said, the words feeling like glass in his throat. "Absolutely wonderful." But as Jennifer beamed and the children chattered about baby names and nursery decorations, Marcus was calculating the mathematical impossibility of maintaining his double life with a pregnant wife who would need more attention, support, and emotional presence. The affair that had felt manageable when Jennifer was distracted by her career would become untenable with a baby demanding both their focus. The pregnancy announcement shattered Marcus's sense of control and forced him to confront the impossible mathematics of his situation. Everything he had built with Isabelle suddenly became a threat to everything he had built before her. His reputation, his family, his financial security, his children's respect. All of it could be destroyed if his affair became public knowledge. And with Jennifer pregnant, the stakes had become exponentially higher. That evening, instead of meeting Isabelle at their usual Wednesday appointment, Marcus called her from his car in the hospital parking garage. His voice was strained, carrying an edge she had never heard before. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "But not at the apartment. Meet me in parking level B3 in 20 minutes. Isabelle felt something cold settle in her stomach. In 18 months of their relationship, Marcus had never changed plans so abruptly, never sounded so distant. She made her way to the parking garage with growing dread, her nursing shoes echoing against concrete walls that suddenly felt more like a tomb than the foundation of the place where they had first fallen in love. Marcus was waiting beside his BMW, his posture rigid with the kind of tension she had only seen him display during medical emergencies. But this wasn't professional stress. This was personal crisis, and somehow she knew that she was about to become collateral damage in whatever decision he had already made. "Jennifer's pregnant," he said without preamble, the words hitting Isabelle like a physical blow. "What does that mean for us?" she asked, though some part of her already knew the answer. "It means there is no us," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the same clinical detachment he used to deliver terminal diagnoses. "It was never serious, Isabelle. You knew I'd never leave my family." The parking garage seemed to tilt around her. 18 months of intimate conversations, shared dreams, and promises of future possibilities collapsed into the revelation that she had been living in a fantasy that only she believed in. "You said you loved me," she whispered, the words barely audible over the hum of ventilation fans. "I said what you needed to hear," Marcus replied with a cruelty that took her breath away. "This was convenient for both of us. You got experiences you couldn't afford on your salary. I got companionship during a difficult period in my marriage. Now that period is over." The dismissal was so complete, so devastating, that Isabelle couldn't immediately process it. The man who had held her while she cried about her family's struggles, who had listened to her dreams and encouraged her ambitions, who had made love to her with what she had believed was genuine tenderness, was reducing their entire relationship to a transaction she hadn't realized she was part of. Professional boundaries are important, Marcus continued, his words carefully chosen to establish legal distance. We'll maintain appropriate courtesy at work, but our personal relationship ends now. Don't call me, don't text me, don't approach me outside of necessary professional interactions. Isabelle stood in that parking garage, surrounded by the concrete and steel that had witnessed countless other conversations, and felt her world collapse with surgical precision. She had built her entire emotional life around a man who was discarding her like medical waste, and she had no resources, no support system, no way to process the devastation he was inflicting with such calculated efficiency. You can't just, she began, but Marcus cut her off. I can and I am, he said, already moving toward his car. Find someone else to project your fantasies onto, Isabelle. Our professional relationship will continue as normal, but everything else ends tonight. He drove away without looking back, leaving Isabelle alone in the parking garage with the sound of his engine echoing off concrete walls like a death rattle. She stood there for 27 minutes, trying to understand how 18 months of love could be erased in less than 5 minutes of conversation. But the worst revelation was still to come. 2 weeks later, while Marcus was helping Jennifer shop for baby furniture and pretending to be the devoted husband preparing for their family's expansion, Isabelle was staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test in the bathroom of her shared HDB flat. Her roommates were at work, the apartment quiet except for the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She was pregnant with Marcus Tan's child. The irony was suffocating. Jennifer's pregnancy had ended their affair, but Isabelle's pregnancy would force it back into Marcus's life whether he wanted it or not. She sat on the bathroom floor, holding the test with shaking hands, and tried to calculate how to survive what came next. The phone call she made to Marcus that evening would determine the trajectory of both their lives, though neither of them could have imagined how far the consequences would eventually reach. We need to meet, she said when he answered his personal phone, his voice immediately tense with the recognition of her number. I thought I made my position clear. I'm pregnant, Marcus, she interrupted, the word stopping his protest mid-sentence. The silence that followed lasted long enough for Isabelle to hear her own heartbeat in her ears before Marcus finally spoke. Are you certain? Yes. Another silence, shorter this time. When Marcus spoke again, his voice carried the cold calculation she was beginning to recognize as his true nature. We'll handle this quietly. Tomorrow evening, same time, same place. Don't discuss this with anyone. The line went dead, leaving Isabelle alone with the understanding that she was about to discover exactly how disposable Marcus Tan considered her to be. The meeting that would seal both their fates was less than 24 hours away. The envelope Marcus handed Isabelle in the River Valley apartment parking garage contained exactly $5,000 in cash and a business card for a private medical clinic in Novena. No letter, no explanation, no acknowledgement that the money represented his attempt to erase not just a pregnancy but any evidence that their relationship had ever existed. The clinic specialized in women's health services, a euphemism that made Isabelle's hands shake as she realized how thoroughly Marcus had planned her disposal. This should cover everything, Marcus said, his voice carrying the same professional courtesy he used with patients' families when delivering bad news. Dr. Sarah Lim is discreet and efficient. I've already spoken with her about your situation. The clinical detachment in his voice was more devastating than anger would have been. He had reduced their child, to a medical problem requiring a medical solution, something to be handled with the same efficiency he brought to treating infectious diseases. Isabelle stared at the money, understanding that Marcus saw this as a generous severance package rather than the complete destruction of everything she had believed about their relationship. You discussed my pregnancy with another doctor without my consent? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I discussed a hypothetical case with a colleague, Marcus corrected smoothly. Patient confidentiality was maintained at all times. The lie was so practiced, so seamlessly delivered, that Isabelle realized this wasn't Marcus's first time managing such complications. How many other nurses, residents, or medical students had received similar envelopes? How many other hypothetical cases had he discussed with Dr. Lim? Handle it quickly, he continued, already turning toward his car. The longer you wait, the more complicated it becomes. What if I don't want to handle it? The question emerged before Isabelle fully realized she was going to ask it. Marcus stopped walking but didn't turn around. Then you'll be a single mother on a work visa with a child whose father doesn't exist in any legal sense. Think about what that means for your immigration status, your family's financial situation, your career prospects. The threat was delivered with surgical precision. Marcus understood exactly how precarious Isabelle's position was, how dependent she was on his discretion, how little power she possessed compared to his wealth and influence. He was offering her money to eliminate their problem, but the subtext was clear: cause difficulties and he would eliminate her instead. Don't contact me again, Isabelle, he said, getting into his BMW. For both our sakes. Isabelle stood in that parking garage holding an envelope full of cash and feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. The money represented 18 months of her salary, more than her family in Cebu would see in 2 years. But it also represented the complete commodification of her love, her body, her future, and the child growing inside her. She walked back to her shared HDB flat in a daze, the envelope burning in her purse like radioactive material. Her roommates were watching a Filipino drama on their tablet, the volume low to avoid disturbing neighbors. They looked up when she entered, immediately recognizing something wrong in her expression. Isabelle? Grace asked, pausing the show. What happened? Nothing, Isabelle managed, forcing a smile. Just tired. But lying in her narrow bed that night, staring at the ceiling while her roommates slept, Isabelle felt something cold and hard crystallizing in her chest. For the first time since Marcus had discarded her, she wasn't thinking about loss or heartbreak or the impossibility of her situation. She was thinking about justice. If you've been following this story's descent into darkness, make sure you're subscribed because what comes next will challenge everything you think you know about revenge, medicine, and the dangerous intersection where love becomes lethal. The transformation we're about to witness proves that sometimes the most dangerous person in any hospital isn't the one holding a scalpel. It's the one holding a grudge. Over the following weeks, as Marcus returned to his perfect family life and pretended their affair had never happened, Isabelle began her psychological metamorphosis from victim to predator. The process was gradual, almost clinical in its precision, as if she were applying the same methodical approach she used for patient care to the problem of Marcus Tan. She didn't immediately decide on murder. The idea evolved slowly, emerging from sleepless nights where she replayed every moment of their relationship, searching for signs she had missed, clues that would have warned her about Marcus's true nature. She analyzed their conversations like a forensic investigator, identifying the manipulation techniques he had used, the careful way he had positioned himself as her savior while actually positioning her as his convenience. The turning point came during a particularly difficult shift in early May. Isabelle was caring for a young mother, Lisa Wong, who had contracted HIV from her husband's affair. Lisa was pregnant with their second child, desperate to prevent vertical transmission while processing the betrayal that had infected not just her body but her entire future. He said it meant nothing, Lisa whispered to Isabelle during a quiet moment between treatments. 2 years of lying, and he said it meant nothing. How do they do that? How do they destroy our lives and then act like we're overreacting? As Isabelle held Lisa's hand and offered comfort she didn't feel, something clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Marcus hadn't just broken her heart. He had infected her life with the same kind of devastating consequences that HIV brought to families like Lisa's. The difference was that HIV could be treated, managed, even prevented. But the virus Marcus had introduced into her life, the destruction of her dreams, her financial security, her ability to trust, had no cure. That's when Isabelle realized she had access to something that Marcus didn't know she possessed. Intimate knowledge of exactly how to weaponize the viruses they treated every day. Working in Mount Elizabeth's infectious disease lab had given Isabelle access to HIV-positive blood samples from across Southeast Asia. The lab stored specimens for research purposes, tracking viral loads and resistance patterns that informed treatment protocols throughout the region. Security protocols existed, but they were designed to prevent accidental exposure, not intentional theft by someone with legitimate access and comprehensive knowledge of storage procedures. The plan began to form with the same careful attention to detail that Marcus had used to compartmentalize their affair. Isabelle started staying late after shifts, volunteering for additional lab duties that gave her unsupervised access to specimen storage. She researched viral loads and infectivity rates, understanding exactly how much contaminated material would be needed to ensure transmission while remaining undetectable in wine or food. The science was straightforward for someone with her training. HIV survived outside the body for limited periods under specific conditions, but blood plasma could be preserved and concentrated to maintain viral loads sufficient for transmission. The key was finding a delivery method that would seem natural, unthreatening, something Marcus would consume without suspicion. His favorite Merlot became the obvious choice. During their months together, Marcus had often brought expensive wine to their apartment, educating Isabelle about vintages and regions with the same pedagogical enthusiasm he brought to medical training. She remembered his preferences clearly. 2015 Chateau Margaux for special occasions, but for regular evenings, he favored a particular Australian Merlot that cost $200 per bottle. The psychological preparation was more complex than the technical aspects. Isabelle had to transform herself from someone who saved lives into someone who could deliberately destroy them. She spent hours rationalizing the decision, constructing moral frameworks that justified what she was planning. Marcus had infected her life with lies, betrayal, and abandonment. She would infect his life with consequences that matched the devastation he had caused. The extraction process required 3 separate visits to the lab over 2 weeks. Isabelle selected samples from patients with the highest viral loads, using proper medical techniques to draw plasma while maintaining the chain of custody that would make her theft undetectable. She stored the material in her refrigerator at home, hidden in medication vials that her roommates assumed contained insulin for a diabetic patient. The psychological toll of planning murder, because that's what this was, regardless of how she rationalized it, manifested in subtle changes that only someone with medical training would recognize. Isabelle lost weight, her appetite disappeared. Her sleep became fractured and filled with dreams that felt more like tactical planning sessions than rest. Her work performance remained flawless, but colleagues noticed a hardness in her demeanor, a clinical detachment that seemed excessive even for someone dealing with terminal patients. "You've been different lately," Grace observed one evening as they prepared dinner in their shared kitchen. "Distant. Are you okay?" "Just tired," Isabelle replied, the same response she had given for weeks. The new medication protocols require a lot of additional training. Grace accepted the explanation because it fit the pattern of their lives: long hours, continuing education, the constant pressure to maintain standards that could mean the difference between life and death for their patients. None of them questioned why Isabelle had suddenly developed an interest in wine appreciation, why she spent her free time researching vintages and storage techniques, why she had purchased expensive bottles that seemed inconsistent with her usual frugal lifestyle. The final phase of preparation involved convincing Marcus to meet with her one last time. This required careful psychological manipulation, appealing to his ego and his need to maintain control over their narrative. Isabelle crafted a message that would seem reasonable, even admirable, a request for closure that would allow both of them to move forward professionally without awkwardness. "I've been thinking about our conversation." She texted him from a new phone number she had purchased specifically for this purpose. "You were right about maintaining professional boundaries. I respect that, but I need closure to move forward properly. One final conversation to end things with dignity." The appeal to dignity was calculated. Marcus saw himself as sophisticated, ethical, someone who handled difficult situations with class rather than drama. The suggestion that Isabelle wanted to end their relationship maturely would appeal to his self-image while addressing his concern about workplace complications. His response came 6 hours later. "River Valley apartment. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. This is final." The message's curtness revealed Marcus's confidence that he remained in control, that this meeting would proceed according to his terms and achieve his objectives. He had no way of knowing that Isabelle had spent weeks planning his destruction with the same methodical precision he had used to plan her discardment. That night, Isabelle sat in her narrow bed, holding the vial of HIV-positive plasma that would transform her from victim to executioner. In 18 hours, she would either find the courage to poison the man who had destroyed her life, or she would discover that love, even betrayed love, still carried enough power to stay her hand. The countdown to catastrophe had reached its final phase, and neither Marcus nor Isabelle fully understood that once the wine was poured, there would be no possibility of return for either of them. The transformation was nearly complete. Tomorrow, Dr. Marcus Tan would discover that some people, when pushed beyond their limits, don't just break. They become something infinitely more dangerous. The River Valley apartment felt different when Isabelle arrived at 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before their scheduled meeting. She had kept the spare key Marcus didn't know she had copied months earlier, when their relationship still felt permanent, and she had imagined a future where such details mattered. Now, as she let herself into the space where they had once made love, the sterile luxury felt like a mausoleum, beautiful, cold, and designed for forgetting. The wine sat chilling in an ice bucket she had brought from home, a 2018 Penfolds Grange that had cost her 3 weeks' salary. Marcus would recognize the vintage, would appreciate the gesture, would see it as evidence that Isabelle understood the sophisticated tastes he had tried to cultivate in her during their 18 months together. What he wouldn't see was the microscopic addition she had made to the bottle's contents using a sterile syringe and techniques she had perfected during countless nights of practice. The HIV-positive plasma had been extracted from 3 different patients over 2 weeks, concentrated and preserved using methods that maintained maximum viral load while ensuring the mixture would be undetectable by taste or appearance. The science was elegant in its simplicity. A few milliliters of infected blood plasma introduced into 750 milliliters of wine, the alcohol content insufficient to neutralize the virus but strong enough to mask any subtle changes in flavor or consistency. Isabelle arranged the apartment with the same attention to detail she brought to patient care. Soft lighting from table lamps rather than overhead fluorescence. Classical music playing quietly from Marcus's expensive sound system. Vivaldi's Four Seasons. Something romantic but not overly sentimental. Cheese and crackers arranged on the coffee table, creating the atmosphere of a civilized goodbye between sophisticated adults rather than the confrontation Marcus was expecting. She had chosen her outfit carefully. A simple black dress that Marcus had complimented months earlier, professional but elegant, suggesting someone who had moved past their affair rather than someone consumed by revenge. Her makeup was subtle, her hair pulled back in the style she wore for important presentations at the hospital. Every detail was calculated to present the image of a woman who had accepted reality and was ready to move forward with dignity. The vial of HIV-positive plasma sat empty in her purse, its contents now mixed seamlessly with wine that would taste exactly as Marcus remembered from their previous evenings together. The transformation was complete. She had become someone capable of murder disguised as closure. Marcus arrived precisely at 7 p.m., his punctuality a reminder of the control he exercised over every aspect of his life. He looked tired but confident, dressed in the same tailored suits that had once made Isabelle's pulse quicken, now serving as armor against any emotional appeals she might attempt. His BMW's engine echoed through the parking garage like a countdown timer, marking the beginning of his destruction. "This is unexpected," he said, noticing the wine and the carefully arranged atmosphere. "I thought we were having a conversation, not a social gathering. I wanted us to end things properly," Isabelle replied, her voice carrying just the right amount of wistful sadness. 18 months deserves more than a 5-minute conversation in a parking garage. Marcus remained standing near the door, his body language suggesting someone ready to leave quickly if the situation became complicated. But his eyes lingered on the wine, recognizing the vintage, calculating the expense Isabelle had undertaken for their final meeting. "Penfolds Grange," he observed. "That's quite an investment for goodbye." "You taught me to appreciate good wine," Isabelle said, pouring 2 glasses with steady hands. "I wanted to show that I learned something valuable from our time together." The compliment was perfectly calibrated. Marcus's ego responded to evidence that his sophistication had influenced someone from a less privileged background. He accepted the glass she offered, settling into the leather armchair where he had once held her, while discussing their shared cases and imagined futures. To closure, Isabelle said, raising her glass. To moving forward, Marcus replied, touching his glass to hers. The wine was perfect, rich, complex, with the subtle tannins that Marcus had taught her to identify and appreciate. He took a generous sip, then another, his professional tension beginning to ease as the alcohol and the familiar environment worked their intended effect. Isabelle matched his consumption sip for sip, the clean glass in her hand containing only genuine wine while his contained their mutual doom. "I've been thinking about what you said," Isabelle began, settling into the sofa where they had spent countless evenings discussing everything from medical ethics to childhood memories. "About our relationship being convenient for both of us." Marcus nodded, encouraged by what seemed like acceptance of his position. "I'm glad you understand. Emotional complications would have made our professional relationship impossible to maintain." "I do understand," Isabelle agreed. "You were managing a difficult period in your marriage, and I was lonely in a new country. We helped each other through challenging times." The conversation continued for 47 minutes, recorded later by investigators as a masterpiece of psychological manipulation disguised as mature discussion. Isabelle guided Marcus through a careful review of their relationship that reinforced his sense of superiority while gradually extracting admissions that would later prove devastating. "Did you ever feel genuine affection for me?" she asked during one particularly intimate moment, her hand resting lightly on his knee. "Of course," Marcus replied, the wine loosening his usual caution. "You're a remarkable woman, Isabelle. Intelligent, compassionate, beautiful. In different circumstances." "What circumstances would have been different?" Marcus paused, considering his words carefully despite the alcohol's influence. "If I hadn't been married. If our professional situations had been more equal. If the cultural expectations hadn't been so complicated." Each admission was another nail in the coffin of his future denials. Isabelle was building a record of emotional involvement that would contradict any claims that she had misunderstood their relationship's significance. But more importantly, she was watching him consume the wine that carried his destruction, calculating dosages and timing with the precision she had learned from years of administering medications. "I want you to know that I don't regret what we shared," she said as he finished his second glass. "Even knowing how it ended, I'm grateful for the experiences, the education, the way you made me feel valued." "You should be grateful," Marcus replied, his usual diplomatic filter compromised by alcohol and the comfortable assumption that he remained in control. "Most nurses in your position never get exposure to the kind of research, the level of medical sophistication, the cultural experiences I provided." The condescension in his voice was breathtaking, revealing exactly how he had always viewed their relationship. Isabelle was supposed to be grateful for the privilege of being his mistress, thankful for the education in wine and culture that came with providing sexual services to her superior. The casual cruelty of his perspective crystallized her resolve completely. "I have something to tell you, Marcus," she said, setting down her wine glass with deliberate ceremony. "What's that?" he asked, already reaching for the bottle to pour himself a third glass. "I want you to live a long life," Isabelle said, her voice carrying a tone that made Marcus pause mid-pour. "Long enough to watch everything you built fall apart piece by piece." Something in her expression shifted, the mask of acceptance falling away to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. Marcus felt the first stirrings of unease, though he couldn't yet identify the source of his discomfort. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his medical training beginning to assess threats even as his conscious mind dismissed them. "The wine you've been drinking," Isabelle said calmly. "It contains HIV-positive blood plasma from 3 different patients. High viral load concentrations, preserved and concentrated for maximum infectivity." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He looked at the wine glass in his hand, then at Isabelle's face, searching for signs that she was bluffing, that this was some kind of desperate emotional manipulation rather than a literal biological attack. "You're lying," he said, but his voice carried uncertainty that hadn't been there moments before. Am I? Isabelle asked. I work in the infectious disease lab, Marcus. I have access to samples, storage equipment, concentration techniques. I know exactly how long HIV survives in alcohol, exactly what viral loads are needed for transmission, exactly how to preserve infectivity outside the body. Marcus set down his wine glass with shaking hands, his mind racing through the medical implications of what she was claiming. If she was telling the truth, if she had actually contaminated the wine with HIV-positive blood, then he had consumed enough infected material to almost guarantee transmission. Check your blood in 3 months, Isabelle continued, standing and smoothing her dress. By then, you'll know whether I'm lying or not. But I think we both know the answer to that. The apartment fell silent except for the sound of Vivaldi's Four Seasons continuing to play, the beautiful music providing surreal counterpoint to the destruction being unveiled in real time. Marcus stared at the wine glass, calculating probabilities and viral loads with the clinical precision that had made his career, while slowly understanding that his expertise was now being used to comprehend his own doom. You can't prove I did anything, Isabelle said, collecting her purse and moving toward the door. I was never here tonight. This apartment doesn't exist in any official capacity. And you'll never be able to explain how you were exposed without admitting to the affair that will destroy your marriage and your career. She paused at the door, looking back at Marcus with something that might have been pity if it hadn't been so cold. Enjoy explaining this to Jennifer, she said. Enjoy watching your children learn what kind of man their father really is. Enjoy your long life, Marcus. The door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed through the apartment like a death knell. Marcus sat alone with his wine glass and his terror, understanding that Isabelle Cruz had just executed the perfect revenge. One that would destroy his life slowly, publicly, and completely, while leaving her untouchable by any legal system. The countdown to consequences had begun, and there was absolutely nothing Marcus could do to stop it. Marcus Tan sat in his BMW in the River Valley parking garage for 37 minutes after Isabelle left, staring at his hands and trying to process what had just happened. The wine's aftertaste lingered in his mouth. What had seemed like perfectly aged penfolds now felt contaminated, poisonous, carrying the potential destruction of everything he had spent his adult life building. His medical training provided unwanted clarity about HIV transmission rates, viral loads, and the 3-month window period that would determine whether Isabelle's threat was empty psychological warfare or biological terrorism with surgical precision. The drive home to Sentosa Cove passed in a haze of alternating denial and terror. Maybe she was bluffing. Maybe the wine had been clean, and her threat was just the desperate revenge fantasy of a discarded mistress trying to inflict emotional pain equal to what she had suffered. But Marcus knew Isabelle's clinical competence, her access to the infectious disease lab, her intimate understanding of HIV preservation techniques. If anyone could weaponize the virus they treated daily, it would be someone with her knowledge and access. Jennifer was waiting in their marble-floored foyer when he arrived, her pregnancy beginning to show in the gentle curve of her abdomen beneath an elegant maternity dress. The sight of his wife carrying his child while he potentially carried a death sentence created a cognitive dissonance so overwhelming that Marcus felt physically nauseated. "You're late," Jennifer observed, kissing his cheek with the automatic affection of 15 years of marriage. "Emma's been waiting to show you her science project. Something about infectious disease transmission patterns." The irony was suffocating. Marcus managed to smile and nod, following Jennifer to their daughter's room where 14-year-old Emma had constructed an elaborate display about how viruses spread through populations, complete with charts showing infection rates and prevention strategies. Her enthusiasm for the subject reminded Marcus of his own teenage fascination with medical science, the intellectual curiosity that had driven him toward infectious disease specialization. "Dad, look at this," Emma said, pointing to her carefully constructed timeline. "HIV transmission rates are actually much lower than people think, especially with modern prevention methods. But when it does transmit, the consequences are permanent." Marcus stared at his daughter's research, seeing his own potential future mapped out in colored charts and statistical analyses. Emma had researched viral loads, transmission probabilities, and the 3-month testing window with the same thoroughness she brought to all her academic work. She had no way of knowing she was providing her father with a roadmap to his own destruction. Very impressive, Marcus managed, his voice sounding hollow even to himself. Your methodology is quite sophisticated. I want to study infectious diseases like you, Dad, Emma said, beaming with pride. Maybe we could work together someday. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Jonathan joining them to ask questions about Emma's project and Jennifer offering maternal pride in their children's academic achievements. Marcus participated automatically, his responses generated by 15 years of practiced parental engagement, while his mind calculated and recalculated the probability that he was already infected with a virus that would destroy not just his health but his family's respect, his professional reputation, and his children's future relationship with their father. That night, lying in bed beside his pregnant wife, Marcus began the psychological torture that would consume the next 3 months of his life. Every interaction with Jennifer became weighted with potential consequences. Every kiss carried the possibility of transmission. Every intimate moment required calculations about viral loads and infectivity that transformed marriage into epidemiological risk assessment. Sleep became elusive, fractured by dreams where he explained to his children why their mother was sick, why their family was destroyed, why their father's selfishness had infected everything they loved. He would wake at 3 a.m., sweating despite the air conditioning, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios that felt increasingly inevitable. His performance at the hospital began to deteriorate within 2 weeks. Colleagues noticed his distraction during patient rounds, his uncharacteristic hesitation when making treatment decisions, his tendency to avoid direct patient contact whenever possible. The irony of an infectious disease specialist developing paranoia about infection wasn't lost on him, but knowing the psychology didn't reduce its impact. Dr. Tan, his chief resident, Dr. Amanda Lim, approached him during a particularly difficult day. The Morrison case requires your input. The patient's viral load has spiked despite treatment compliance. Marcus reviewed the chart with hands that trembled slightly, seeing his own potential future in another patient's declining health markers. Increase the dosage and monitor for resistance patterns, he said. His standard recommendation delivered without the confidence that usually characterized his clinical decisions. Sir, are you feeling well? Dr. Lim asked, concern evident in her voice. You seem fine, Marcus interrupted sharply, then moderated his tone. Just tired. The hospital expansion project has been demanding. But he wasn't fine, and the pretense became harder to maintain as weeks passed without resolution. The 3-month testing window stretched before him like a prison sentence, each day bringing him closer to a reckoning that would determine whether Isabelle's revenge had been psychological or biological. The first test came at 11 weeks, performed at a private clinic in downtown Singapore under a false name. Marcus had created the fictional identity months earlier for research purposes, never imagining he would use it to hide his own HIV status from medical colleagues who might recognize his name. The wait for results felt interminable, 72 hours that stretched like weeks, filled with scenarios ranging from miraculous reprieve to complete destruction. Mr. Lim, the clinic doctor said, using Marcus's assumed name, I have your test results. Marcus sat in the sterile examination room, his medical training providing unwanted understanding of every pause, every hesitation in the doctor's demeanor. He could read the results before they were spoken, could see in the physician's expression the same careful compassion he had used countless times to deliver devastating news to patients' families. I'm sorry, the doctor continued. The test is positive. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, though some part of him had been expecting this outcome since the night Isabelle revealed her revenge. He had infected Jennifer. He had destroyed his children's future. He had validated every terrible prediction his nightmares had provided over the past 3 months. Are you certain? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We've run the test twice for confirmation, the doctor replied gently. I recommend immediate consultation with an infectious disease specialist and disclosure to all sexual partners within the transmission window. Marcus nodded automatically, his mind already racing through the impossible logistics of explaining his infection to Jennifer without admitting to the affair that had caused it. How could he tell his pregnant wife that he was HIV positive without revealing the relationship with Isabelle that had led to his infection? How could he protect his unborn child while confessing to betrayals that would destroy their family even without the virus? The drive home passed in a fog of calculations and scenarios, each more devastating than the last. Jennifer would need immediate testing. The pregnancy would require specialized monitoring. Their children would need counseling to understand why their parents' marriage was ending and their mother was sick. The hospital would require disclosure that would end his career and trigger investigations that might reveal the full scope of his affair. But the worst realization came when Marcus understood that Isabelle had orchestrated perfect revenge. She had infected him with a virus that would force public disclosure of the affair that had caused the infection. He couldn't hide his HIV status without endangering Jennifer and their unborn child, but he couldn't reveal his HIV status without admitting to adultery that would destroy his marriage and his professional reputation. Isabelle had created a scenario where every option led to his complete destruction. The conversation with Jennifer that evening began in their bedroom, where Marcus found his wife reading pregnancy guides and making notes about nursery decorations. She looked up when he entered, immediately recognizing something wrong in his expression. "Marcus? What is it?" "We need to talk," he said, sitting heavily on the edge of their bed. "About my health. About us." The confession that followed lasted 3 hours and destroyed both their lives in ways that went far beyond simple infidelity. Jennifer's rage when Marcus revealed his affair was nothing compared to her terror when he explained the HIV infection. Her devastation when she understood that her pregnancy had been potentially compromised by his selfishness. "You infected me," she whispered, her hands moving protectively to her stomach. "You infected our baby." Her test results, obtained the following day, confirmed Marcus's worst fears. Jennifer was HIV positive. Their unborn child faced potential infection despite medical interventions. The fairy tale family life they had constructed in Sentosa Cove was over, replaced by medical appointments, antiviral medications, and the constant specter of a disease that would define the rest of their lives. The divorce papers Jennifer filed within a week included custody restrictions that would limit Marcus's access to Emma and Jonathan. The medical board investigation triggered by his mandatory disclosure would review his fitness to practice medicine while HIV positive. The hospital began damage control measures that included transferring Marcus to administrative duties pending resolution of his case. But the investigation that would ultimately destroy him began when Marcus filed a police report against Isabelle Cruz for intentional HIV transmission. Detective Sarah Ng, a specialist in medical crimes, listened to Marcus's confession with the kind of professional skepticism reserved for cases that seemed too elaborate to be true. "You're claiming that Nurse Cruz deliberately infected wine with HIV-positive blood and served it to you during a consensual meeting?" Detective Ng asked, reviewing Marcus's statement. "Yes," Marcus replied, understanding how unbelievable his story sounded. She had access to infected samples through her lab work. She had the knowledge to preserve viral infectivity. She had motive for revenge. "And you have proof of this alleged poisoning?" Marcus stared at the detective, realizing the perfect bind Isabelle had created. He had no physical evidence. The apartment had been rented under a false name. Their affair had been conducted in complete secrecy. His only proof of intentional infection was his own confession to adultery, which provided Isabelle with clear motive for revenge but also revealed the ethical violations that would end his career regardless of whether she was prosecuted. "The proof is my infection," he said weakly. "Dr. Tan," Detective Ng said gently, "HIV transmission through consensual sexual contact is not a crime. Without evidence of intentional infection through non-consensual means, we have no basis for prosecution." By the time investigators attempted to locate Isabelle Cruz, she had already fled Singapore. Her work visa had been terminated, her apartment abandoned, her roommates claiming no knowledge of her departure plans. Immigration records showed she had boarded a flight to Manila 3 days after Marcus's positive test results, carrying only a single suitcase and a one-way ticket funded by what appeared to be her entire savings account. The Philippines had no extradition treaty with Singapore for medical crimes, and Isabelle's home province of Cebu provided the kind of rural anonymity that made international fugitive investigations nearly impossible. She had disappeared into a population of millions, protected by geography, bureaucracy, and the fact that her alleged crime couldn't be proven even if she were captured. Marcus Tan's life continued its systematic collapse over the following months. His medical license was suspended pending review. His divorce from Jennifer became final with custody arrangements that reflected her justified fear of his judgment and character. His children, Emma and Jonathan, began therapy to process their father's betrayal and their mother's illness. His professional reputation, once unassailable, became a cautionary tale whispered in Singapore's medical circles. The man who had once been everything Singapore's medical establishment celebrated, brilliant, published, successful, became a ghost haunting the periphery of the world he had once dominated. His story served as a warning about the dangers of affairs, the consequences of abuse of power, and the devastating potential of revenge planned with medical precision. But somewhere in a small province in the Philippines, Isabelle Cruz was learning that revenge, even perfectly executed revenge, came with costs that extended far beyond the destruction of her target. The virus she had used as a weapon hadn't discriminated between victim and perpetrator, and her own positive HIV test, obtained months after her return to Cebu, left her questioning whether her infection had come from Marcus during their affair or from her own exposure during the preparation of his destruction. Justice, she discovered, was more complicated than revenge, and the line between victim and perpetrator was thinner than she had imagined when she first decided that Marcus Tan deserved to experience the same devastation he had inflicted on her. The story that began with a love affair in Singapore's most prestigious hospital had ended with 2 destroyed lives, 1 broken family, and a virus that would connect Marcus and Isabelle forever through the very infection that had torn them apart. In the end, nobody won.